So, with Alabama set to take on Southern Miss this weekend, there's a lot we need to talk about because a lot has been said about the Crimson Tide this week. From Nick Saban pointing out that this is a really young team, to Will Anderson saying that the defense needs to get back to playing to the Alabama standard, and finally, two SEC hosts talking about the Crimson Tide and debating, is this team elite? And we've got to weigh in on all of it. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from you. Hop down to the comments, give me a Y for yes or an N for no. Do you believe this Alabama team is elite? And let me know what you're thinking. If you are new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell notification. If you enjoyed the content, like and comment down below. Those interactions are massive to content creators such as myself. But with all that being said, let's jump into the first area, which I really want to talk about what was said in the debate between the SEC hosts, because Chris Doering had a very interesting take, saying that if you believe Alabama is elite right now, you are a clown. And while I understand where he's coming from, I think he approaches the argument wrong. So first and foremost, I think one of the interesting things that happened when these two were talking is how this was all framed. Doering was attempting to say that it's very hard to crown a team elite within only 3 games of college football play. And first and foremost, I don't necessarily disagree with that argument. If the basis of the whole argument is saying that, hey, it's only week 3, there are good teams, there are teams that look like they could be elite, but to call any team elite right now is problematic, I could buy that argument, and I could say I'd largely agree with it. I think that we can quantify teams who have been elite through 3 weeks, but if you want to base your view off of no team can be quantified as elite until we have more on them, that's completely fair. I think we lose vision of that point, however, when Doering starts comparing this year's squad to last year's squad, because then it isn't about 3 games, it's about what Alabama was able to do last year. And the reason why, ultimately, even though I get what he's saying, Alabama didn't play their best against Florida, it's very hard to frame this argument as Alabama isn't elite this year because, and I quote, they aren't infallible like last year, and that he didn't think this year's team is as unbeatable as last year's. But that right there isn't the standard for elite. And if we are to buy into that argument, we're buying into the notion that the standard for elite is ever evolving. And while it is evolving based on the parameters of college football, one team's status does not completely move the ground on what is and what is not elite. I point that out because of this. If we are buying into that sentiment, then we are saying unless a team can surpass what 2020 Alabama did offensively, defensively, going a perfect season and then winning a national championship, they cannot be elite. That creates a slippery slope. I understand what Doering was trying to say here. I think if they would have just left the argument that Alabama did not play to their ability against Florida, which part of that is due to what Florida did. The other part is Alabama had lapses in concentration in terms of execution and tackling, and it really hurt them. I mean, the one play I can point to off the top of my head is the 3rd and 10 in which they had Florida dead to rights. DeMarco Hellams comes up and just absolutely whiffs on a tackle. Florida goes on to score a 99-yard touchdown drive. Things like that completely changed the course of the game, and sadly, that missed tackle from Hellams was not a one-off or not something simply relegated to that one drive. And I think ultimately that points us back to what Peter Burns was trying to say in his debate against Chris Doering. That, yeah, Alabama played flat after the first quarter against Florida, and it wasn't their A game. And even then, even in a game where Alabama did not have their A game, they downed the number 11 team in a hostile environment with a very young team. Something that Nick Saban pointed out this week, saying that he doesn't think a lot of people really understand. Saban talked about he only has 2 seniors on his leadership committee, and that is indicative of a team that is very young, that is still growing, and it is still a very young college football season. So a lot of growth is going to be happening on a week-by-week basis for this Crimson Tide, and which is exactly why I disagree with Doering's notion that to be elite is to be infallible. To be infallible is to be perfect, and perfection is not elite. There are a lot of great teams. There are teams that finish the year without winning a national championship that we could call elite teams, but there's only one national champion. So to be infallible and to be elite, at least to me, are 2 different things, but I'm very interested in hearing from y'all on that. Hop down to the comments, let me know what you're thinking there. But all of that is to say, talking about the Florida game and how there was lapses in execution, lapses in tackling, that moves me forward to the game this week against Southern Miss and why I'm so glad there's a tune-up game between Florida and Ole Miss. Because just like Nick Saban pointed out, this is a young team. There's going to be an evolution with this team. And Will Anderson even doubled down, saying the defense has got to play to the Alabama standard. And that's really good to hear out of Will Anderson, because he played the game with a ton of heart and a ton of passion. But he is a leader on this team. He is someone that people are going to look up to. And when he goes out on the media and says that, that's coming from a guy that left it all out on the football field, had to be helped off the field. He was so exhausted. That's something I think players will respond to, and I'm interested to see how that response will happen during this week. Because this is a really big game for the Crimson Tide. An opponent they should easily handle. That's not my contention and why I say this is a big game. This is a game in which you get to go through stuff and correct some of the mistakes you had against Florida before you take on a very challenging Ole Miss team. A team that I have no earthly idea how they aren't ranked inside the top 10. They've been very good to this point this season, and it's very hard to gauge where their defense is, but here's the only thing I will say on their defense. They're playing harder, they're playing more aggressive, and they're playing more passionate football. They're playing with some want to. And so whether or not they are a good defense really remains to be seen, but they are certainly playing harder defense, and so that is something to take note of. That's why it's so good Alabama gets this tune-up game in order to work through things before they ultimately have to take on Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, because there are some things that need to be corrected. But like Saban said, this is a young team. There's a reason why after watching the Florida game, I wasn't particularly worried, and I was largely upbeat and pointed out that Alabama just walked in there, didn't play their best football, and still came out with a win. In my opinion, the most impressive thing was when Alabama needed a touchdown, Bryce Young marched them down the field and got it. Does that dismiss any of the concerns exiting that game? Certainly not. Certainly not. But I think it highlights what Saban is meaning. This is a young team, and to see a young team be put in that position and respond said a lot to me about how this team could grow. That's why I do believe this team is one that could be an elite unit in 2021. Hop down to the comments. Let me know what you're thinking about the game against Southern Miss. Let me know what you're thinking about what Will Anderson said, what Nick Saban said, and ultimately the debate that happened on SEC Network between Peter Burns and Chris Doering, where I absolutely understand the point Doering is trying to make. I just think that the way they're trying to frame it is wrong. Let me know what you're thinking. That's it. See ya.